It's my pleasure to welcome Norm Roule to the Cipher Brief studio. Norm, of course, served as a national intelligence manager for Iran under multiple administrations and remains deeply connected in the region and travels there frequently to meet with leaders throughout the Middle East. So, Norm, I could really think of no one better to talk to about the situation there at the moment. I just want to rattle off a couple of headlines from the Cipher Brief's open source report. President Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, set to travel to Israel to discuss the worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza. 14 nations now have joined France in a push to recognize a Palestinian state. Families of Israeli hostages are condemning the UK's plan to recognize a Palestinian state. Lebanon's president is urging Hezbollah to give up arms. Dozens, the U.S. is also slapping fresh sanctions on an Iranian shipping network. I mean, there are so many different directions we could go that I wanted to just say, with all of this activity in the Middle East recently, Norm, what is top of mind for you? What is the area that you're most focused on as being the most consequential?
Thank you. And it's great to be with you, Suzanne. And thank you and Brad and your entire team for what the Cipher Brief does every day. I am an eager reader, listener of your many programs, and I benefit tremendously from what you do. I'm grateful, work harder, put out more. I'm smarter from what I get from you, and Lord knows I need to be smarter. I think the way I would begin is by saying that the Middle East has seen a lot of extraordinary events in the past year, and you've rattled off a few in the last 24 hours, 48 hours. And it's important to sort of sift between what is in the news that's big news and what is really extraordinary and what isn't going to shift things. But we have had a substantial reshuffle of a very traditional strategic deck of policies in the region. And this doesn't make the game of policy easier for policymakers, but it does give us some new hope for policymakers of winning the game. So let me give you a sense of, for policymakers in the region, in Europe, and in the United States, what they're facing as they're now, as Steve Witkoff and others are going out into the region and dealing with these various events. So after Iran has spent many years turning our red lines pink, for the first time the U.S. has struck Iran. Israel struck multiple Iranian nuclear sites, missile sites, et cetera, building on previous strikes. And those were red lines. The U.S. joined Israel in military operations. People thought that had been a red line in the past. And this precedent has now been set. So for the nuclear negotiations and other talks going forward, for Iran, they now have to deal with, they have a new world where that is a precedent. The 12-day war that is now in the past didn't create a new international order. There is no new regional framework that has been set. So for policymakers going to the region, Steve Witkoff dealing with Gaza and other issues, the events that took place prior to that war in Gaza and elsewhere, they're still driving the course of issues. So there are some specifics that I would dive into that touch on everything that's going to be happening in the next week. So first, Iran's stature as a regional coercive actor has been diminished by its almost strange decisions to aggressively expand its nuclear program and attack Israel, because it allowed the U.S. and Israel to demonstrate the unsurprising strategic superiority of our joint intelligence and military capabilities. But now we have given that lesson to Iran, the region, and the world, and now Iran is constrained, but they also see, I think, a sense of where they can operate and not operate. And if they stay within those boundaries, we will maybe leave them alone. Assad is gone. The new Syrian president is someone for whom we should take some risks, even bold risks, but we need to be realistic and patient. And I think as you're looking at this region, as Witkoff is going out and Tom Barrack and others are working with this region, we need to have a stable and unified Syria with friendly relations with Syria, Israel, the Saudis, keep Iran out. Few countries have managed all of those things at any one time, and the Syrian president must do this with a population that contains multiple armed groups, his own pedigree of being a terrorist. and a population that has many years of dark and deep grievances against its own various elements of that same population. And we need to be prepared for future outbreaks of violence, as we saw against Sueda and against the Alawites. So, if only because so we can deal with their prevent their expansion. As I think the administration has done rather well. We also need to deal with the foreign fighters that are out there. We're also watching Steve Witkoff and others deal with Lebanon. And Lebanon, I think, is another example of it's moving in the right direction, but we need to be realistic. Hezbollah won't put its arms down willingly. Beirut lives in a world where more than a few Lebanese leaders have been on the wrong end of a car bomb if they push too hard against events. And Israel is now fighting a hard and long war. Its military is efficient and effective in doing what a military should do, but we shouldn't overlook the fact that it's tired. This has been an expensive war. It has taken serious losses. In addition to the complaints that you have mentioned in your statement, there will be Israelis who will look at any peace talks and say, my son and daughter died or was wounded in that conflict, and you're now talking about giving peace to Hamas. You're now talking about standing down in that war. This is a very turbulent Israeli political situation. Israel's political problems are going to continue. But this bleeding ulcer of Gaza and the bleeding ulcer of Sudan are going to continue in the near term. But we do have some good news in the region as well that I think Witkoff and others have to work with now. You've got the Saudis, the Emiratis, even the Qataris trying to stabilize Syria. The Saudis just invested $4 billion in basic industries. That should be applauded. We've got the U.S. Trying to do everything it can to bring a diplomatic solution to Sudan, and let alone Gaza. The Arab League just called for Hamas to put down arms and pull itself under the Palestinian Authority. That's a first. That's never happened. That's amazing. And I think maybe something that has also been missed is the Abraham Accords have survived this war. And the United Arab Emirates has demonstrated that the Abraham Accords could be used to funnel a ginormous amount of badly needed humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people. And God knows they have needed this in terms of food and medical assistance. And the Emiratis have shown tremendous generosity in providing this assistance. And then they have pressed the Israelis, Palestinians on this conflict. So, you talk about what has happened this week, but I think it's important to have that entire framework, because that's what Steve Witkoff has in his head as he's going out this weekend. And that is going to drive how the conversations take place.
Norm, I wanted to get on Iran with you in just a moment, but first let me just ask, Syria's foreign minister is making his first official visit to Moscow. Are you concerned about this? And if you are, what are your concerns?
Well, to an extent, the Syrians need to develop a stable, unified country. They will need some assistance from everyone. That includes Russia. They will need some, and that will mean some fuel assistance. That will mean some financial aid of sorts. But Russia's day as a major player in Syria, I think, is past. Russia has moved on to Libya and, to an extent, Algeria. I think that's pretty clear. I think it's also unrealistic to think that Russia will be entirely out of the picture in Syria. And it's going to be a balancing act between the various players of Russia, Turkey, Israel, the Gulf. Iran will be the least of those parties. But in the end of the day, the Syrians will need to balance between the many players who have been part of its environment. But I don't see Russia returning in the big way that it has been a part of Syria in the past.
Norm, let's talk about this 12-day war. It happened in June. Excuse me. I'm wondering now, we've had some time to start various assessments in terms of damage assessments and what was actually achieved during this war. From your perspective and the folks that you've been talking to in the region, what is your assessment of where we are and what was actually achieved from this attack?
So first, if you speak to people in the region and elsewhere, they have seen what should have and what we ourselves have seen, and that is that the execution of the conflict demonstrated that the U.S. and the Israeli military and intelligence communities did exactly what should have been expected of first world institutions of their nature. We saw a crisp, efficient success delivered with great skill and hard work by two communities that have had years of cooperation. And this involved very, very important technologies, not just F-35s, but also the MOP. And we should keep in mind that these are not new technologies. The MOP program began in 2004. The program against Fordow, specifically with the MOP, according to public information, began in 2009. So we're talking about technologies that in many ways are a decade old. But nonetheless, these were executed in a manner against a long-standing adversary that resulted in a strategic setback without starting a regional war. Now, you have to expect that inside of Moscow and Beijing that they're looking at this and saying, "Holy cow! This is an amazing demonstration of American technology." I can't help thinking that how this conflict played out will have some impact on their war planning, Russian and Chinese war planning, and also how they may look at how China would play out an attack on Taiwan. I don't think people think about that sufficiently. But let's think about what actually occurred in that. Israel achieved air dominance over Iran in every way that mattered within 48 hours. And that is extraordinary because they not only had air dominance, Israel controlled the skies, but it also controlled what choice of buildings, bridges, personnel they could take out. To specifics, Iran's enrichment program as a program and Iran as a weapons threat no longer exists. Now that can be rebuilt, and we shouldn't understate that, and I'm not trying to downplay that, but Iran's enrichment program no longer exists. And I'll leave it to policymakers and pundits to argue about what word they want to apply to that. My sense is that the threat of Iran's nuclear program, as defined prior to the attack, Iran's weaponization program, and there are many definitions you can apply to that, has probably been set back by 1, if not 2 years. Now, the exact time will depend upon what type of weapon Iran would build, how fast, how covert. But Iran's centrifuge manufacturing facilities, its enrichment facilities at Natanz and Fordow, appear to be damaged to the point of total destruction or massive destruction. Iran's conversion facilities required to transform enriched uranium into nuclear fuel or weapons grade metal have been destroyed. Iran's plutonium reactor and heavy water reactor at Arak have been destroyed. Multiple key scientists have been killed. And I don't think people understand what that means. These are not only scientists, but these are people who manage scientific organizations. Their loss will be significant. And last, there is no public evidence, despite what all the rumors talk about, that Iran has retained any enriched uranium. And the president and the secretary of defense have stated that they have publicly that they saw no evidence Iran has removed that material. If Iran did, that material would still have to be enriched in centrifuges that don't appear to exist, in facilities that don't exist, et cetera, et cetera. Now to missiles. Israel likely destroyed more than half of Iran's ballistic missiles and 60 to 80% of Iran's missile launchers and the personnel associated with those launchers. Israel's decapitation of Iran's military didn't stop Iran's military from responding with missile attacks. Now, that's not a surprise. Iran is not a terrorist organization like Hezbollah. It's a government with multiple layers and multiple facilities, and it has an independent structure, and that's expected. But that decapitation meant that Iran's response was different. It was less efficient, and it lacked the strategic vision and agility that those senior commanders would have demonstrated, but didn't exist in those initial attacks. Imagine if George Patton were taken away from the Third Army. The movie, the war would have played out very differently, right? So Iran's responded with missile attacks, but those attacks, whereas they had continued at a diminishing rate. They continued using missiles that were fired from further east. Now, those missiles also involved larger warheads, which meant they had a bigger impact when they hit the ground. It didn't mean that Iran wasn't getting missiles through, but those attacks had no impact on the strategic course and the direction of the conflict. I can't help wondering if that conflict would have continued, what would have remained of Iran's missile force if, in essence, the decision had been made in Jerusalem and Washington, just let this play out until Iran has no missile program. Would that have been possible? Now, this said, Iran retains a coastal defense and missile force that they can use against the Gulf Cooperation Council. And therefore, when people think about Iran as a missile threat, it may not be as significant a strategic threat against, say, Israel, but its threat against other regional actors is no less significant than it was prior to the conflict. And people, again, need to think, what does that mean in terms of how the region looks after the conflict, before the conflict? In terms of the Gulf, in some ways, it hasn't changed.
Let me ask you, Norm. I think that one thing that wasn't deterred by the attack was Iran's nuclear ambitions. And with Iran being sort of firmly a part of this axis of resistance, its associations with North Korea, which of course has a nuclear program, with Russia, with China, and you mentioned the taking out of the experts, the nuclear experts and the missile experts. I wonder, how long do you think it would take for Iran to reconstitute and become just as much of a challenge as it was before the strike? So you said 1 to 2 years. Is that sort of on par with how long you think it would take them to be back where they were before?
Well, first, if you're in Iran, you have to make this strategic decision. If we restart the program, will the United States and Israel attack? You've got to have that conversation. So you've got to decide, if we do this, will we survive? And then you've got to decide, how do we restart the program in a way that will allow us to survive? And then you've got to say, well, how much money do we invest, and where do we get the parts and pieces, and do we rebuild factories? How long does that take? Now, they have plenty of underground facilities. That's not going to be a problem. They will have likely centrifuge parts and pieces that they retained from their previous construction. I wouldn't be surprised about that. They may have some even entire centrifuges from their previous construction that they had not declared to the IAEA. But that doesn't mean they have cascades. But again, as they build this, they've got to come up with why are we doing this? And then they've got to think about that conversion plant. They've got to think about storage. They've got to think about all those other issues. I do think there's a sense of nationalism in Iran. You will have a mixture for each of these facilities, for each of these offices. You'll have a varying degree of flavors of some people who will wake up and say, I want to work there to be part of this program to protect my country. And then you'll have other people who say, I don't want to go there because the last 3 guys were killed. And that's going to impact the efficiency of those programs, their success moving forward. And last, this will take a lot of time. Yeah. And Iran is not an efficient country. And it's going to have to decide, if it does this, what does it gain? Now, I think really where that plays out is with the nuclear talks and the International Atomic Energy Agency. So if we can shift to the talks, right now, Iran is half pregnant. It is saying they're not allowing the IAEA in to assess the program. They may allow the IAEA in for some discussions. They don't want to leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Their refusal to cooperate with the IAEA could be a violation of their international safeguards commitments under the NPT, which could require they be sent to the UN Security Council for this very reason. I think what Iran is going to try to do is to use this half pregnant period to squeeze concessions out of the Europeans to delay the snapback of UN Security Council Resolution 2231 sanctions, to delay that in order to give itself more time to think about where its program will go. Because I think if you're in Iran right now, your feeling is, look, where we are right now is known to the West. Their intelligence was pretty good. They know what they destroyed. It's available public information through overt imagery. They're not going to go to war for what's left in our nuclear program. Therefore, why shouldn't we just buy ourselves some time to think about this and to think about where this goes? Why do we have to rush to rebuild this program? Why don't we just delay this and see how many concessions we can squeeze from the Europeans, the West, to see where this goes, and make defiant statements as much as we can diplomatically.
Mm-hmm. Norm, let's talk for just a minute about U.S. relationships in the region. With all of this activity going on, we've heard about the investments that you mentioned by the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Qataris, really stepping up and trying to bring some stability to the region through their investment schemes. You're seeing President Trump, who obviously is not really showing cracks in his support of Israel, but he is showing incredible frustration over what's happening in Gaza at the moment. How do you see the nature of the U.S. relationships in the region, given everything that's happening?
Again, I think I'm going to go back to my original statement. The deck of cards has been reshuffled.
Yeah.
And what that means is, and also my statement that what occurred prior to the 12-day war remains in place. Mm-hmm. So prior to the 12-day war, the U.S. strategy for the region was rather consistent. The U.S. does not wish to see the outbreak of a region-wide conventional war, and that includes a war started by Israel. The U.S. will use military action if it believes that the Iranians are engaged in some sort of weaponization and or terrorist activity. The U.S. will pursue unrelenting diplomacy with any actor. The U.S. will pursue economic sanctions on Iran. The U.S. will talk to near anyone. The U.S. will provide partners in the region with weapons that they need. The U.S. Will not involve itself with engagements in the region that mire it in conflicts, Houthis, et cetera, et cetera. I think this is all the same. But the U.S. also is not going to tie itself to local political issues. So let's look at Gaza itself as a problem. If Gaza is going to be solved, in my mind, eventually it's going to require four elements. The first element is going to be the Israelis are going to have some freedom for IDF to ensure that nothing occurs in Gaza that could threaten Israel, again, such as October 7th. The second is you will have to have some sort of Palestinian authority or Palestinian governance through a Palestinian leadership architecture that Israel is yet to admit. The third is you're going to have a renewed relationship between the Gulf states and the Palestinian Authority of Trust. And last, you're going to have a security architecture that does not involve Hamas, but some international relationship that can promote reconstruction so that the Gulf states aren't throwing away their money. The IDF is assured that there aren't terrorist elements. A Palestinian Authority can promote governance. We're not anywhere near that, but that's how this is going to be solved. Right now, we're in a blame game on humanitarian issues. We're not solving the humanitarian issues. We spend all of our time blaming who's responsible for the humanitarian issues. Is it Israel? Is it Hamas? Is it the United States not putting enough pressure on people? But we've seen extraordinary steps in the last week. The Arab League said to Hamas, put down the weapons. The United Nations has admitted that a vast majority of the trucks that entered into country had their goods stolen by someone, armed gunmen, and that's going to be criminal gangs, Hamas, or someone. We do have food drops, which is a terrible way to deliver food into a location because only the strong grab it, and it's just a terrible way. But I think more broadly, what we're watching is, and the president, I think, is seeing this, is we're looking at a world where we talk about dealing with wars in Ukraine and Taiwan, and the Cipher Brief covers this, and we've chatted about this so eloquently. You guys cover this, but really, we can't manage internationally a conflict in a piece of land 24 by 7 miles
In
for
Gaza, yeah.
months. Really, international community can't get that taken care of, but we're going to take care of Taiwan. We're going to take care of Ukraine, and there is a growing frustration. You see this in many areas in Washington, that this is a bleeding ulcer. But at this point, there is also a recognition this isn't going to change until we have a different approach and even a different government in Israel. So you've watched in the last week, the United Kingdom, France, and now Canada have each said that they're going to recognize the Palestinian government in coming weeks. This doesn't really mean much because there really isn't a Palestinian government in Gaza. This might have meant something 20 years ago or 15 years ago even, but until we have those four elements, you're not going to have those political gestures translated to something that is meaningful. And that means until you have a different government approach by Jerusalem on Israel, you're not going to have a shift. I do think what the Arab League step this week deserves attention by your readers, because that demonstrates what I've been watching for quite some time, which is significant quiet diplomacy by the Saudis in particular. The Saudis have done significant work behind the scenes, pulling together the Arab League. We don't think about Arab diplomacy as being very active. It's just very quiet. It's unrelenting. They have a difficult political environment in their world. But Gaza does not look promising in the near term, nor does
Norm,
Sudan.
all of these things are incredibly delicate, as you know better than anyone. I can't even imagine how the IDF would even begin to try to have a presence that would be able to attack something like terrorism, just knowing how terrorism functions and operates. But I want to shift to energy with you quickly to talk about that for the remaining time that we have. You know, there's always an incredible interest in the stability of the region, in what's happening, and all of these different activities that pop up. And what it might mean to the flow of energy. You spend an enormous amount of your time focused on this topic, Norm. I'm wondering what you can tell us about what you're predicting at the moment in terms of how what we're seeing in the region today is going to affect short-term and long-term energy prices.
Sure. And in fact, I think that it's imperative that your readers understand that the relationship between energy, um, chemicals,
Mm-hmm.
and artificial intelligence is a marriage that is here to stay.
Mm.
And if you understand that sort of trifecta, you will understand the relationship between the United States and the Gulf, and you will understand money movements. You will understand how the administration assigns personnel, how it assigns trade, how it assigns political attention to the region, sort of working from west to east. It is clear you're going to see more attention paid to North Africa. The Moroccans have been very active on solar power. You're seeing Morocco and Algeria each trying to play a larger role in demonstrating to Europe and Africa that they can be reasonable and key interlocutors on energy. In their own way, Morocco tends to be a more favorably treated partner by the United States, but the Algerians are engaged in considerable outreach. Libya has proven to be, and I'm confident Libya is going to be a much larger player in the oil world in coming months. We've seen 4 or 5 different energy companies develop new contracts, and I think Libyan oil production is going to increase in towards the end of this year and 2026. And as we watch U.S. oil production drop towards the end of this year, the number of wells in the United States, the number of rigs has declined, and I think we're below the level of maintaining our production at this point. Unsurprising, but Libya may go up to 2 million barrels. But the gold is really going to be in the Gulf with natural gas and oil, but you can't separate this from their artificial intelligence ambitions. And here, I want to go back again. I want to keep going back to the reshuffling of the deck and the drivers before the 12-day war, because that really should be your paradigm. And here's where I want to touch on something that I think people don't should really focus enough on. The president of the United States went to the Gulf and he conducted deals that were worth $2.5 trillion, right? These are big sums, and it's all energy. And he's gone to Europe and he said, we're going to sell you a lot of energy and it's natural gas, and we're going to, tie you to our technology, et cetera, et cetera. And he did the same into the Gulf. How many of those leaders came to the United States? How many of those people has the president engaged directly? Now, explain to me why we don't see more Gulf leaders coming to the United States. So I think you're going to see more Gulf leaders coming to the United States. It is simply, it boggles my mind that we don't see the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia coming here. We should be asking him to come to the United States. We need to see the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia in the United States, speaking to our technologists, our policy leaders, our military, for a country that is spending that much money here, where we're engaged in the security. We have European and other leaders. We need to have, again, the head of president of the United Arab Emirates and the Qataris. If you're going to have the prime minister of Italy, if you're going to have the prime minister of Asian countries coming here and so forth, we need to, if we're going to have that kind of economic, strategic energy engagement, I think what's missing from here is we're not having that sort of engagement with those actors here as often. And I'm going to make a prediction here that you're likely to see more of that, because just as the Trump administration has has done things differently in so many different ways, so many ways with the region in the past, I think it's willing to have different types of relationships with people. And we saw Mohammed bin Zayed here in the past, and others. And I hope we just see more of this in coming months, because that amount of money needs to be understood, and they need to hear from our political, commercial, and technology leaders here. You will see the unraveling of the OPEC constraints in coming months. You will see the Gulf become a leader, if not the leader, on natural gas production in coming years. You will see a production of nuclear energy in Saudi Arabia in coming months, if not year or two. I will close by saying there is a challenge, though, I think the Trump administration is going to face. You must pity the people in the Department of State and Department of Commerce who are working on all of these trade deals. Those of us who have worked in government know there are only so many hours in the day. There are 24. I tried to squeak 25 out and found it's just not possible. And paper is paper, meetings are meetings, and to get things processed at once is hard. And all of these different complicated interagency requirements to do so many meetings at once must make this a difficult processing time to get so many trade deals done. And I think what that's going to mean is these energy deals, trade deals might end up being a little more slowly to be executed than people think. So people should be patient and not see that as maybe a failure on anyone's part, and more in terms of a natural progression of bureaucracy, as hardworking as it may be. Sorry to go on so long on that.
Norm Roule, it's always a pleasure to hear your perspectives on these issues. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Of course, Norm served as the National Intelligence Manager for Iran at ODNI under multiple administrations, and again, travels regularly to the region. So we always value our time with you, Norm. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Suzanne.